Hello and welcome to Terrain Odyssey. My name is Jay and today I'm going to be starting a new series and I'll talk about why this series is happening at the end of the video, but essentially I'm probably going to just adopt the phrase Poorhammer. It's something that is already on YouTube and people are aware of that as a phrase. I was considering calling it like cheapest possible terrain, but basically it's a set of terrain, or the plan is it's going to be the cheapest you can make certain things, or just really cheap versions of things. And today I'm going to be making this crater. It's maybe not picking up very well on the camera here, but I'll show you pictures and stuff like that at the end, of course. Yeah, it's going to be as cheap as possible. This is literally tissue paper and paint. So as you can tell, really cheap. But I just wanted to kick off this new sort of series, and I'll talk about why at the end. So let's get cracking with how I made it. Yeah, let's go. So I made this using some card. Now, you don't necessarily need the card. I think I just wanted the card to make it a little bit easier to handle, and I was a little bit worried that the bottom of the tissue would be possibly uneven. But I essentially just roughly drew out a crater on a piece of very thin card. This is actually the back of it's some Coca-Cola card that you get like your cans of Coke in. You can use whatever you like. You don't actually need to use it, but you just cut out the shape. Now I exaggerated the shape because I wanted to have something to hold on to and room to change my mind. You could literally just cut out the shape if you wanted, but I just made an exaggerated shape. So before we start, I get the card and I put the whole thing on some non-stick paper just so I don't make a mess. I think I actually gonna have to recommend that you do that, because if you don't do that, you put it on like newspaper, what might happen is that the PVA will soak into the newspaper and your card will get stuck. You could have it elevated, but then I'd be worried about warping. And then the important bit here, as I said, we're literally using toilet roll tissue, and we are going to dip it in watered down PVA. So I can't really give you an exact mix here, but you're going to get your tissue paper. Well, you're going to mix up some water and some PVA. You probably want it to be quite wet. So in mine, if I'm honest, I probably had my PVA and water mixed too thick, and what that meant was like it was really, really sticky to the touch, and I couldn't properly drain it. So I don't have footage of this because it's a bit of a mess, and the tub that I use is a little bit small. But essentially, you want to get your PVA, get your water, mix it so it's quite, let's even say, I'll say 50-50, but maybe even more water than that. Dip your tissue paper in it, rinse it if you can. If you can't rinse it, as in like it's too thick and the PVA is on it too much, like don't worry about it, you can still use it. That's actually what I did. But water is the enemy here for drying. The more water you have, the longer this will take to dry. So you got tissue, it's paper mache. It's not exactly the rocket science this, but you get your toilet roll, dip it in your watered down PVA, like rinse it if you can. The first thing I'm going to do is make the middle, the center circle, and that's the main ring that we're going to use. You're making sausage shaped tissues here. That's easy enough to understand. For the shapes that come from the circle, I'm going to call them like spider's legs, just to make them a bit easy for you to understand what I'm talking about, even though I'm sure the visuals will make sense. Again, it's just little sausages connected to the main ring in the middle, and you can do them in slightly different angles, slightly different lengths, whatever you want. That makes it look fine. You don't have to worry too much here about the texture or anything like that. We're mainly just trying to get the shape. So once you've got your shape, you've got your little legs dangling off from your circle. Once you've got your first shape, your rough draft, everything should very reasonably stick together because of the PVA and water mix. But what we're going to do is get some PVA and just literally PVA from the bottle, just pour it on. You want PVA all over what you've just done. And if you can, get a wet brush, have some water nearby, and just try and brush the PVA all over what you've done. Now it might be a bit sticky and some of the paper might tear. Don't worry about that, it's not really a problem. We're going to go over it in a minute anyway. So once you've got your PVA all over it, I do occasionally just throw on some water, because sometimes my mixture of PVA isn't very easy to spread, or it starts stirring stuff. So I literally have a bottle of water and I just keep pouring it on it. It's probably a mistake, but I'm relying on the incredible summer weather we're having in the UK at the minute to dry this. If you're worried about drying times, then as I said, you want to avoid water, so you want to rinse it all out. Once you've got your PVA all over it, it's nice and spread out. You could let that dry if you wanted. I actually sort of would recommend letting it dry and then going over it with a final bit of tissue. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to go straight over it. What I'm actually going to do is just get some tissue, and I'm not going to scrumple it up or anything like that. We're not making sausages here, and I'm just sort of going to layer it over the top, so like a blanket. We're going to literally take some flat piece of tissue. If you had like kitchen roll, that would be better. It's thicker, that would be much better than this, but I'm using toilet roll, so and you're just going to layer it over it so it covers everything. And what this is going to do, it's going to join everything up. So it's going to join those legs, the dangly out bits. It's going to join them up. It's going to possibly create a middle. You might want to do a few more in the middle. I think I ended up doing too much in the middle, and then I like scraped it out and did one extra one. But you're going to want to get tissue sort of all over it. If you've got a spray bottle, spray it. For the flat piece though, I'm putting them on dry and then putting a bit of water and PVA over it. If you don't want to do that and you've got a big container, you could put some like tissue paper in it, or kitchen roll would be better, and then rinse it and still have like a flattish piece. If you can have a flat sheet, then feel free to just use that. I only had a small container, so I couldn't actually rinse it and have it flat, so I put it on dry and then just get a bit of water and a bit of PVA and just sort of like put the water on it, put the PVA on it, and spread it out with a brush. And don't worry about the textures too much. You don't really want it to rip, because ripping will look a little bit weird, but the texture should here just naturally form. And once you've done that, basically again, another final layer of PVA. PVA is great, water's bad. That's the only thing you really need to know here. Once you've done that, I would suggest painting it with PVA and black paint. Before I actually paint, after I painted it black, I cut out the additional like legs and stuff like that. I would suggest PVA and black paint. I didn't do that. I just sprayed it with black primer because I wanted to get this done quickly. And then I covered the whole thing in grey. Initially I was just going to dry brush it up from black, but I realised again I don't like that look. Paint the whole thing grey, add a bit of white paint to your grey, and just gradually do dry brushes. Dry brush is getting the paint on your brush and wiping most of it off, and then like gently going over it so only the edges are painted and the recesses are dark. If you're unsure what that dry brushing is, I'd suggest just googling it, but it's fairly common. Dry brush it up to the lightest shade of grey you're happy to go. You can go to white, but be very gentle if you do go to white. I put a bit of flock on it. I realise not everybody might have flock. That's it, it's all done, and the enemy here is drying time. So what you really don't want is a really wet piece with no PVA, because that could simply just never dry. Water is the enemy essentially. It's hot in the UK, so I could get away with having a bit more moisture than normal, but if you just had more PVA than water, what would happen is that it would get too sticky and you wouldn't really be able to use it, and if you have too much water than PVA, then it might never dry. But honestly, really cheap, reasonably easy. If it's summer, get it out in the sun essentially, and if it's winter, get it over the radiator. Jobs are good. And I'm making this series, I said at the start I'd talk about why I'm making the series, because when I'm thinking about ideas, I start struggling with the concept of cost. A bit of me wants to do everything for almost like the cheapest possible you can do it, but there's like a scale of how cheap something is to how good it looks, or well, actually normally it's a triangle. How much time it takes, how good it looks, and how much it costs, and you sort of got to pick two. That's the classic like idea, and I do believe that. So I'm sort of going to separate my videos. We're going to sort of have like a default normalish one, then we're going to have like realistic ones, and then right at the bottom I'm going to have this like Poorhammer or cheapest terrain possible, or extreme budget terrain, whatever name I come up with, and that's going to just be stuff that's like you probably have in your house. I was tempted to call it like trash terrain, but the problem with trash terrain is, oh, I've just picked up this thing, you might not have this. If you don't, it's like using materials that you just find isn't necessarily great for a tutorial because you might not have it. Whereas if I do stuff like this where everybody can find card and tissue paper and probably PVA, like these are all things that people might have, well, probably have already. So that's the Poorhammer. It just fits this sort of like, my mentality is like, let's do it as cheap as possible. But sometimes I want to just do it like cheap as possible, but I also want versions that I'm going to use that maybe a bit quicker, maybe a bit more durable, maybe a bit easier, maybe a bit nicer looking, and then maybe these ultra realistic ones that we'll eventually do. So that's why I'm making it. I realise for everybody it might not be that useful, but for me it just gets it off my chest, because it's like, let's say I wanted to make a pond. You could make a pond using this method. It would look reasonably nice. Do you know what I mean? Whereas I'm probably, if I do make a pond, I'm probably not going to do that method for the tutorial. So I just wanted to like separate it, introduce this series. I made something, literally I made this on the last channel, but I just wanted to get it out of the way because it's quite quick and it's a good introduction to my new Poorhammer terrain. Have a beautiful day, like and subscribe. Goodbye. Thank you.